Chapter 11. The king has imprisoned the Norseman as his hostage. As Osrith continued skimming the documents, the monk Guthred gave her information at top speed, about the king's arrival, the battle, the surrender of the Norse. It was a week before Christmas. The ground was hardening. Light reflected from the smoothness of the Adun, and she watched it each morning as the sun rose, scattering its beams through the ice crystals in the air so they sparkled on its surface. This place was so beautiful, and she fancied that she could see her Motju walking here and there, before traveling from west coast to east, to her marriage to her father at Bibbenberg. More people rode horses on the higher ground over at Strathclyde once, whether it was Rose or Norse, perhaps the Elsa Thurgilson brother, but none came to challenge Caeligwylid. It was beyond the fighting season, yet, armies still fought. Domhnall was still to fight. No news had come to Caeligwylid of a defeat or a victory. Each morning, as new scrolls were archived on the floor below her, she crept down to read them, searching for news, crushing the longing her gut bore, that she would be with him, fighting. But, how she longed for it. Though she had triumphed, she would rather have been standing beside Domhnall. She hoped that whatever Grioghair, who had lauded them all as heroes a few nights before, needed to agree with Guthred, that it would be concluded with haste. She had spent the day after the battle away from the scriptorium. There was a certain amount of time needed to repair and reclaim and to bury the dead, and she had been helping the warriors until Tagged had pulled her aside, giving her news which made her heart sore. Grioghair had informed Tagged and Fergus that they were to prepare to sail. To where, Tagged did not know, but guessed Alba? Osrith thought that too, and suggested to Tagged that perhaps Domhnall had been victorious. Tagged did not know, taking up her hand as they walked by the river, but it was known that the Scots, all the southern lands called the Gaels Scots, Domhnall, had defeated the Thurgilson army, which the brothers had then turned in anger and little strategy onto Caeligwylid, with even worse losses for them. Osrith, looking down at Tagged as he trained with Fergus, remembered wishing he hadn't taken her hand, for it had taken all her will not to pull close to him, and kiss him. For, if the Gaels had defeated the Norse, thus suggested Domhnall had strength. She could not, yet, dare to believe he had won the throne from Eochaid and Giric. Osrith dragged her eyes away from Tagged, and forced herself to listen to the ebullient Guthred, her joy that she may be leaving for Alba overshadowing the monk's garrulousness. Of course, King Guthred wants to know the brothers are defeated. The one called Eric has been turned over to guarantee the peace. Usually, Guthred turned, looking at the ancient script of Why God Eden that Osrith was again reading, hostages join the household. But, Guthred does not have a household here. He is married. Osrith thought of the Danish hay-coloured, weak-eyed ex-slave who she had saved from slaughter. Abbot True had told them that when they had arrived. He was not what she expected the king to be like. But, he had been chosen by Cuthbert, and she trusted the blessed scent of her land. Nevertheless, he had hardly gone screaming into battle, and imprisoning the Norseman was surely preferable to Guthred than having him at large. It implied he thought the Norseman might escape, or worse, open the city up to attack, like the Greek horse statue at a battlefield before a city called Troy long ago. Then, suddenly, through the door, came King Guthred himself. Guthred put down the Cymric manuscript and looked a little abashed. He bowed, to cover his embarrassment at his free tongue. "Brother Guthred," Guthred said, in his quiet, steady voice. Guthred glanced at Osrith, and was about to say something when the matins rang. Guthred made his apologies and left, the door and steps creaking in his wake. "Lord King," Osrith acknowledged, as the door closed, getting to her feet, and bowing her head. "No. No, my dear, it is I who must thank you." He smiled, a weak smile. "The Norse have long avoided Caeligwylid, my own father, Hearthknut too. You have no doubt heard of his exploits." "I have heard of them," Osrith replied, wondering why the king had sought her. She had planned to practice sword skill with Tagged and Fergus, but she could hardly ignore the king. She thought back to the name she remembered, that Domhnall had showed her. Hearthknut had raided into Strathclyde, but had, like the Norse brothers the day before, had been soundly defeated. Which was why Guthred, captured as a slave, had been sold to King Eochaid, Hearthknut slain and most of his army lost. It had made Harold Finehair, kin to the Thurgilson brothers, strong on Pitland's eastern coast. I am returned to Halligwifferkland, of which Caligwillid is its capital as, yes, my dear wife died. He fingered the ancient parchment on which Talakin's poem of defeat to the Saxons was written. We lived at Eofic, for I am king of Northumbria. I have more claim than you, Osrith thought, hotly. My mother was of Urien's line, my father was of Ida's. Both the Britons and the Saxons have a better claim than any Dane. And judging by your reluctance to fight for your own kingdom, I could defeat you. But, he had not gained kingship through prowess, Osrith reminded herself, as the weak rays of the winter morning found the tower's window. If she challenged the king, she was challenging the church. And you are the warrior who saved my life, Guthred continued, when Osrith said nothing. I saw you fight, I have never seen the like. You were outstanding. Lord King, Osrith nodded, pleased he had noted her skill. Down in the courtyard, distant clatters of blades echoed upwards as the Britons beyond the walls of the city cleaned up the battlefield. You have worked well with the manuscripts. It is good to be the ally of Domhnall. Against Eochaid, you mean? Osrith asked, suddenly. Guthred's pale eyes brightened. Eochaid made a mistake, Guthred said, for which I forgive him like my mistake, and I pray those who I wronged that they, too, will forgive me. The slaves? Guthred nodded, and Osrith thought of Ethne again, Princess Ethne, once queen of Mahinarion, Domhnall's sister. She may be able to send word to him that she was alive. Would she forgive the plot that carried her away in shackles from the beach at Dara? Except, he will never forgive. Forgiveness is a Christian virtue. The man I wronged is a pagan, so I allowed that he avenge me by using my money to end a blood feud, and married my sister. Guthred looked out of the window, then, down to Osrith, then placed a parcel wrapped in cloth before her. In the distance, the matin bells rang again. I am to preside over a service of thanksgiving for our defeat of the Norsemen, Guthred went on. And my alliance with Domhnall. Guthred gazed down from the window again. Indeed, monks were bringing winter greenery into the church, along with silverware and, if Osrith was not mistaken, the casket holding the body of St. Cuthbert, her heart soaring. They were going home, and soon. She had prepared her belongings, too. They just needed to be wrapped in her blanket. Unlike Tagd and Fergus, who were warm in the hayloft above the horses, the scriptorium was chilly at night. Osrith followed the saints' slow procession across the courtyard. Even Tagd and Fergus sheathed their swords with the Caligwillid guard. It being the season of Advent, Abbot Drew has prayed on the matter and has sought God's guidance, Guthred continued, watching Osrith as she looked down at the activity below. He decrees that we may celebrate our fortunes this evening, following the service with a feast and ale. Good news indeed, Osrith smiled, looking back to the king's face, and Guthred smiled at her. A feast was welcome. She could be with Domhnall's men, relax with the warriors, eat Fergus-sized portions, for she had, of late, found herself growing hungrier than usual. Perhaps this was a sign they would be soon heading home. This is for you, Guthred said, pulling away the cloth. Inside, a dress lay, carefully folded. Lord King, Osrith began, looking at the silk. It must have cost a fortune. I do thank you, but, it felt magnificent. But ... no. Lord King, I am a warrior, these are my clothes. Osrith pointed with her hands to the clothes that now barely fit. Ah, Guthred said, bending back a little. I intended for you to be by my side, my warrior, beside Cuthbert, of your land? It was at this point, Osrith thought, much later, that she should have known. Guthred knew too much about her without having conversed with her. Why had she not suspected? Instead, she had let Guthred unfold a dress fit for a Merovinian queen, holding it by the shoulders and allowing it to fall so she could see it. It would be no less an honor to stand beside you, Osrith, no matter what you wear. And, I will be going home, Osrith thought, back to Dunnottar. If it aided Domhnall's diplomacy, then she could. It wasn't forever. And, it was no less than spectacular. Osrith looked at the fibers. Dyed with so much care and dedication to match all the thread's shades, to weave, to create. Lord King, I would be delighted. But Guthred wasn't listening. I will send a servant this evening to help. He smiled his strange, thin smile, before sweeping from the scriptorium. 10 minutes later, Osrith saw Guthred in a hurried conversation with Abbot True and 2 other monks, as they pointed, gesticulated, to various parts of the city before walking, swiftly, into the church.